This is Budapest, Hungary, a city my husband Frank and I are very well acquainted with. And this is the Danube River, which divides the bustling capital. Frank left Hungary at the age of 18 in 1956 after taking part in the armed uprising against the Russians. Because his family stayed, we've been going back to see them about every 3 or 4 years since 1971. But this is not about the family. It is instead about some very special people whom we've come to know over the years, who live far from Budapest, yet who are having an important effect on this city. Budapest has always been the place to shop. Now, because of free enterprise, folk art more than ever is being sold everywhere. Store windows display museum-quality pieces, and people do more than just look. Foreign tourists and Hungarians themselves come to Budapest to buy. Selling these objects has brought about a revitalization of the traditional arts. More and more of the village people realize that the beautiful embroidery work that they do can be sent to Budapest to be sold, and this is helping the people keep their folklore alive. To see where some of this folk art is made and who the folk artists are, we have to go about 80 miles northeast of Budapest to an area known as Matyó land. The countryside in the 1990s appears very much as it did at the turn of the century. It is quiet, and you can feel that life is slower paced. You can see peasants stacking their hay. And you can find fields of sunflowers rotating their heads as the sun moves. It's not unusual to see a woman sitting outside her house potting peas. And it's also not uncommon for women to get their water from street-side pumps. No help from the men, though. And this is a place where the roosters still do the wake-up call. One out of 5 Hungarians lives in Budapest, but these are the people who live in the towns. It's where parents walk their children where they need to go. Many people ride their bicycles from place to place, and there's really no need for a car. Here, too, even a horse cart is still a means of transportation. Make way, they're turning left. The Matyó area includes 3 towns, Mezőkövesd, Tard, and St. István. All 3 produce folk art, but Mezőkövesd is the most well-known. It has always been accessible to tourists because it is just off the main highway going from Budapest to Miskolc. But as we leave the main street, we find that the noise diminishes. There are a few very old whitewashed thatch-roofed houses, and as we drive, we can see blocks of fenced-in homes, and there's some new construction, too. As we continue down these streets, we see women sitting outside their houses embroidering. This has been the tradition in the villages for generations. In this old photograph, 3 Mezőkövesd women are sewing and embroidering. And these Mezőkövesd women are doing the same today. They are very accustomed to this kind of work because they learned how when they were about 6 or 7 years old, and many continue to do it into their 80s and 90s. These women sew vests, blouses, tablecloths, pillow covers, and wall hangings. Instead of making things only for themselves or for their families as they did in times past, they are working on items to be sold in local souvenir shops or in Budapest stores. These women sitting on the side of the road are good friends, and they get together to laugh and reminisce while they do their embroidery. How can we recognize Matyó work? Well, the women select certain stitches, colors, and motifs that are identifiable as belonging to the Matyó region. These elements are composed like music, so that the final product has the unique and unmistakable style that distinguishes it from other regions. To understand more about Matyó culture, we talked to Dr. Gyula Hankóczy, a folklorist and former director of the Matyó Museum.
Itt jártunk a régi hímzéseknél, ezt aztán idővel fokozatosan felváltotta, részben a helyi ízlés, részben pedig a kereskedelmi érdek miatt. Az úgynevezett mai Matyó hímzés, amit leginkább ez a hímzett tím képvisel, jellegzetes színeivel, zsúfolt kompozíciójával, a minták elhelyezésével, és amit manapság tömegesen a Matyó Házipari Szövetkezet állít elő. Manapság Matyó hímzés alatt mezőkövesdi hímzésre gondolunk, és ahhoz hasonló stílusban, mint amit az ing képvisel. Tehát a szomszédos falvak régi stílusú hímzésre ilyen formában teljesen háttérbe szorult, nem utolsó sorban nem győzöm hangsúlyozni a kereskedelmi érdek miatt. Történetesen ugye a fekete és fehér alapon levő Szent Istváni hímzések, kötényhímzések milyen ordítóan különböznek például a tardi keresztemes kötényektől. Ezen egy nagyon szép felirat is van, Szemán János 1901, hát hogy ő készítette, és hogy ugyanezek milyen borzasztó módon különböznek a mezőkövesdi, nagyon zsúfolt, harságszínű tényektől.
The Matyó people's folk costumes are distinctive and elegant, and they were very widely known, particularly after 1912. It was in that year that there was a dance event in Budapest called the Matyó Ball. Everyone who came dressed in Matyó costume. These clothes were so impressive that a good number of them found their way into the Ethnographic Museum. Who were the Matyó people? Many of them were subsistence farmers. Some earned a living as tradesmen, but most of the Matyós were what the Hungarians call shumas. Those peasants with no land to farm sent family members to work the land in other parts of the country for 6 months of the year. Starting in the late spring, they hired themselves out as agricultural workers, and it became a way of life.
Meg a gyerekei jártak sumásnak, meg a férje, ők sumásnak jártak, igen.
Mentek, de én nem tudom, hogy családtul.
Mit jelent az a sumás, aki elbérelni saját magát?
Igen, május 1-én elmentek, ilyen nagy állami gazdaságba, aztán akkor csak novemberben jöttek haza, 6 hónapra.
Hozták a pénzt?
Hozták a pénzt, a víztet,
amire szerződtek, mit kapnak egy nyári
aztán akkor
munkát,
kapálás,
6 hónapi munkát,
kukoricatörés, cukorrépásás, aratás, minden, ahogy jött egymás után minden. Ezt elvégezték, ugye.
Télen meg otthon volt?
Télen meg otthon volt.
Télen elfogyasztották azt, amit nyáron megkerestek. Akkor másik tavasszal megint mentek.
These shumash workers did not take their fancy clothes with them, so when they returned, everybody would put on their most beautiful outfits. In this way, they reconnected to their land, to their people, and to the life and customs they were familiar with. They would take Sunday walks, and the women would compare their own embroidery to the work of others, noticing every detail. Their love of variation within the tradition brought about individual masterpieces on vests, on men's shirts, and on men's and women's aprons. These Matyó people distinguished themselves as makers of beautifully embroidered and splendidly colorful clothes. People talked about Matyó clothing, saying that it had brilliance and glittered. But it got to a point where these poor people were spending their entire earnings on colored yarn and thread, on fringes, lace, factory-made trimmings and ribbons, on glass sequins and metal ornaments and braiding. So for this reason, the local Catholic Church interfered. In the spring of 1925, on Ash Wednesday, the priests sent out a directive ordering the removal of all the costly ornaments. They collected them in big baskets, which were carried by women and girls in a procession to the church doors, where they were burned in a huge bonfire while they sang penitent hymns composed for the occasion. The thought was that, with no embellishments, their clothing would be less expensive and more people would be able to afford other things. Making these elegant clothes did stop for a while for most people. Nevertheless, by the late 1940s and early 50s, living expenses increased so much that no one could afford to make Matyó costumes. So that tradition came to an end. Just because they weren't wearing the fancy clothes doesn't mean the embroidery stopped. In fact, practically every woman either embroidered or drew the designs, or they did both, because it provided employment. Kisanko Bori was one of these women who became a drawing specialist. In the Matyó area, a woman who draws these designs is known as an ironö. Kisanko Bori was the most famous ironö in Mezőkövesd, and she lived from 1876 to 1954. She was so talented and respected that other women would copy her designs on their own embroidery work. Some of her patterns were drawn for entire borders, and others were single flowers or flower clusters. She invented a distinctive embroidery language and gave names to many of the flower designs. By doing this, she created a special Matyó vocabulary. She became so famous for drawing the floral designs that people come to Mezőkövesd just to see her small house, which is on this street, named after her. And in the main part of town, outside the Matyó Museum, a statue was erected in her honor. Continuing in the same tradition as Kisankó-Bori is another and one of the last ironős of Mezőkövesd, a recognized master folk artist by the name of Kata Istvánné. In 1987, she was 84 years old, and we were very fortunate to talk to her and see her working at her craft, drawing flower designs. As a friend of Kisankó-Bori, and with a lifetime of experience, she had many stories to tell. Kata néni told us that her mother had also been a drawing lady and had shown her how to draw the patterns. She said that when she was young, 40, 50, and 60 years old, she'd rather have done this than anything else, that it had never been a chore. We noticed her favorite corner and chair out on the porch, and she showed us a piece she'd been commissioned to design and make for a church in the town of Veszprém.
Ezt is szabad kézből rajzoltam.
We'd been to a church in Tard one early Sunday morning, and there we saw a beautifully embroidered communion table cover and knew that Kata Istvánné's piece would soon be seen in a similar setting.
Ezt mennyi idő alatt tetszik tudni kivarni? Egy ilyet?
Hát, ha muszáj, 2 nap.
2 nap?
Igen.
De akkor éjjel-nappal?
Hát akkor aztán reggel fölkelek, ezt így kell számolni, ugye, hogy most ezt, tehát ugye, na, ez nagyon sürgős lenne, 2 nap alatt megvan. Tessék.
Kata Istvánné remembered drawing flowers in her grandfather's prayer book when she was her granddaughter's age, about 6. And Kata néni showed her great pleasure at having a very talented granddaughter herself. And she was not even in 1st grade yet.
Hát ahogy ugye, hogy hát finomodik, meg gyakorol, ugye, már ezt a tehetséget ugye lehet ugye, hogy hát fejleszteni. De akiben nincsen meg már ilyenkor a tehetség, abból nem is lesz soha. Már nem tud mit fejleszteni, mert nincs mit.
It seems that the job of an ironö will die when Kata Istvánné can no longer do it. But we get a good feeling when we see that there may even be an ironö in the next generation if her young granddaughter follows her grandmother's example. She signed the completed drawings, Kata Istvánné, Mezőkövesd Master Folk Artist. And then, to our surprise, yes, she gave us these gems of the afternoon. Down one of the old Mezőkövesd streets, a husband was bringing some soda water home to his wife. Her name is Gari Margit, and she is a well-known and expert embroiderer. We first met in 1971, and we've been coming back to see her every 3 or 4 years. We looked around their yard and noticed their well, their woodpile, their chicken coop, and their flowers in the garden. And I was thinking about what village life was like.
Jó hűs van, mi? Jöjjön be. Ezek azok az amerikai ezencsik, már magát egy varjét már.
I remembered the kitchen with the hutch and the old-fashioned stove, and there were lots of painted plates on the walls. The saints' pictures were still there. As were the embroidered wall hangings. So too were the old enamel wash basin and pail. In 1987, Gary Margit was 84 years old, living with her husband and older sister. There they were, busily making mezőköves folk art, and we watched as their very able fingers worked on pieces to bring in some extra money to supplement their meager pensions. Gary Margit made steady stitches on her sewing machine, and Erzsébet embroidered with her colored threads. The saints watched over them as they worked at their craft, and the clock continued ticking as it has for so many years. As the summer sun came in through the window, we realized we were privileged to be watching two wonderful old women creating traditional art. We visited again 3 years later in 1990, and as if no time had passed, we found Gary Margit at home. Just as before, she graciously invited us in, and we could see that she and her 91-year-old sister were still busy working. The program on the radio was about a scandal in the leadership of the Small Landholders Party. Following that, there was information about owning vacation homes around Lake Balaton. She showed us a beautifully embroidered pillow cover she'd just finished. And we looked closely at the rich design.
Nem jó kedvünkből csináljuk, de hát muszáj.
Gary Margit told us that both she and her sister still had to supplement their pensions by sewing clothes, by embroidering pillowcases and table covers, and by making mezőköves dolls. And then she went to get some to show us.
Nézd, babák. Babákat csinálnak?
Csinálom azt is, mert varrunk is.
Igen, látom.
A néném 91,
91.
én meg 84. Na. Itt van, kedves. Muszáj. Az öregnek dolgozni kell. Mert nagyon keves a nyugdíj. Alamizsnak.
Gary Margit had just had an eye operation, and because the new glasses were not ready yet, she continued working even though she had to wear 3 pairs at once. Since her husband had died a month before, now she and Erzsébet were keeping each other company. She told us that as the mother of 4 children, 13 grandchildren, and 10 great-grandchildren, she'd always given a lot of love, even though she'd never been able to give a lot of money.
Kedvesem, megmondom őszintén, nekem a kommunizmust akkor mire folyamodtam, hogy a családomnak lakást vagy valamit, mert én még Pestre is gyűjtöttem a Néprajzi Múzeumba fel. Gyakran jártam fel, a sportutai, a kultuszminiszter ide telefonált Kövesdre, hogy mint adatközlő terjesztenek fel egy kis nyugdíj alatt. Innen még azt kapta vissza Pestre, hogy én a pápától kérjem. Mert miért? Azt akkor Párizsból, ugyanígy, mint ahogy maguk bejött valamikor, amikor a Kisjankóházban voltam egy atomfizikus, a feleségi orvos, bejöttek Kisjankónyi, ezek már hány esztendeért, 8 vagy 10 esztendeig. Minden esztendőbe eljönnek. Ide Kövesdre, most is itt vannak, csak Romániába mentek át. Ő meg zsidó ember, mégis Rómába, a Vatikánba szokott, így barát és meg összekötetés. Aztán hát könyvet írtak franciába.
Igen, azt láttam azt a könyvet.
No, aztán akkor ugye a Szent Atyának is küldtek tánkig. Azt onnan kaptam Szent Atyától. Azt, hogy úgy mondta ez a Párizsba való zsidó ember, no Margit néni, itt van a nyugdíj a Szent Atyától.
As we left, she and her sister continued working. Her words remained with us. I remember exactly what she said. Our life has always been difficult, but we've gotten used to it. The real power resides in God, and He keeps the roof over us. We came back on Sunday, but not wanting to disturb the prayer meeting that was going on inside, we listened by the window as 6 or 7 older women could be heard singing a hymn together. In 1990, we returned to number 25 Utfors Street to see the 87-year-old ironö Kata Istvánné. On this Sunday, she too was waiting for a group of her good friends to gather in her home for a prayer meeting.
Tessék bemenni, megnézni. Az asztalt is lefényképezni, bent az asztalon van szűzanyaszobor, meg virág. Igen, hát nagyon szépen köszönöm, hogy megtetszettek emlékezni rólam, de tudom, mert ugye még az érzés, amivel születtem, meg amivel fejlődtem, ugye, még az megvan bennem, de már tehetség, már kitartás nincs. De.
It was hard seeing her this way because we remembered how vital she'd been just 3 years before when she'd drawn all those floral patterns for us. In Tard one Sunday morning, we came early and watched the people gathering for the 8:30 Mass. We thought we'd see some peasants dressed in Matyó Sunday clothes, but the days of wearing traditional costumes have passed. While many were attending the church service, we went down the road and up to the top of the hill overlooking the village, and there was the local cemetery. We saw an older woman who'd come to tend the grave of her husband. He died in 1972. As it had been while he was alive, her job was to take care of him, only this time she was watering and tenderly caring for the flowers around his grave.
Húznám a vizet is, meg minden, de így végképpen nem bírom húzni. 68 éves vagyok, beteg is vagyok, aztán így nem bírom hozni a vizet, locsolni a ide. De hát amúgy még csak kijövünk hozzájuk, aztán akkor meglátogatjuk egy pár szál virágot, hozzunk nekik, aztán akkor el tudjuk a teendőinket, megtegyük a tisztességet nekik, hogy hát no, itt vagyunk, mi látogassunk benneteket. Akkor nagyon szépen köszönöm a félvételt. Most már majd megyek arra messzire haza. Na, így felveszem az adényt, aztán akkor majd megyek. Na, Isten áldja még.
The cultural roots in the Matyó area are deep, but if they are to continue to flower, they have to be watered. In Mezőkövesd, this is still happening in the hands of a woodworker named András Kovács. He's a recognized folk artist and he makes furniture in the Matyó style. He enters his pieces into national and international competitions. In his own house, here, we were able to see carved cabinets, mirrors, tables, and chairs, all prize-winning Matyó furniture. As a special treat, he took us into his workshop. We watched each step in the process of making a wooden object, starting with the right board. Agneta, his granddaughter, was anxiously waiting to assist her grandfather, and it seems she'd done this many times before because he was very willing to have her help. When he finished, his grandson Szabolcs Jr. came in.
Hát ezt még reszelni kellene, még csinálni kellene, és így elművésztetek. Egy kis fajka, egy lomb.
I was amazed to see how the two-headed horse figure had been almost magically made. Fathers often work with their sons, and this is the case with András's son Szabolcs. He paints the traditional flower motifs on the furniture that his father makes, and is very proud that the finished work has the touch and look of silk. He says that each piece of handmade furniture is a tie to the past, and this not only gives people a means to connect with something older and historical, it also allows for contact with a thing of beauty.
Matyó ágy leegyszerűsítve, leszűkítve, egy fésülködő kamarás asztal, egy tükör hozzá, a két ágy és a székek, amik nyíri szekrényeit szolgálnak. Ez a kiindulási ágy, ez az eredeti méretű ágy, úgynevezett trónusos vagy sárkányfejes ágy, ez a bizonyos sárkányfej, és különféle alakú székek, ilyen zöldeskék mély alapszínnel. A kék bútornak az oldal fílunkba, tehát az oldalán található motívum, a szekrénynek a ajtó motívuma, a kék szekrénynek az ajtó motívuma.
During our 1990 visit, Szabolcs's wife Maria led us to the old section of Mezőkövesd.
Come, everybody.
Although Maria is an English teacher in Mezőkövesd, she helps András and Szabolcs in their new business of exhibiting and selling Matyó furniture and folk art.
The house, the top of the house.
Hello, főnök úr! Szia!
Jó előben vagy, látom.
Ja, most ebédelt.
Én jobb előben, te jobb előben vagy.
It is for a folk artist, so each folk artist gets one house in this area, because it is the old part of the town, and they are quite old houses, more than 100 years old generally. And there are, I think, 5 or 6 similar houses here in this area.
What about Szabolcs's father? Does he have a place? Or he put some of his things
It
here?
belongs to a family, so yes, because he makes the woodwork, yes, and Szabolcs paints it.
Szabolcs and András make all kinds of furniture, tables and chairs, beds, chests, mirrors, boxes, cradles, wardrobes, and hutches, and they sell them in Hungary as well as to people in Europe and in the United States. Szabolcs also paints the same floral designs on eggs that he paints on the furniture. Maria helped him set up, and we watched the master at work. On a Saturday afternoon in the summer of 1987, some of the Mezőkövesd women were setting up a souvenir stand to sell Matyó dolls. And one of the women was carrying her costume, getting ready to change for the afternoon wedding. Whose wedding was it? We soon found out that it was a wedding for tourists. The modern-day Mezőkövesd couple wears the traditional Western wedding clothes, and to look at them, it seems they have very little in common with the Mezőkövesd couple of the past who dressed in traditional Matyó wedding clothes. Yet by living in this town, the modern bride and bridegroom certainly know of the area's rich traditions. The people of this town have heard family stories and have seen the old pictures of friends and family gathering to see the bride. Today in Mezőkövesd, their folklore has taken on a new vitality, and the people realize that others outside the Matyó area are interested in their traditions and are willing to pay for them. Come with us now and let's follow these Mezőkövesd women down Kishanko-Bori Street to meet the tourist bus. A large group of Belgian tourists have come all the way from Budapest to Mezőkövesd for this wedding. The tourists are met by their new friends and are accompanied down the street to where the wedding is to be held. It's always been traditional for the bride's friends to walk with her, and so it is with this bride. We all start to feel a part of the wedding as the members of the Matyó folk dance ensemble pin a special green leaf on the guests as a sign of welcome. Our son David's been tagged by a pretty one. This old picture shows everybody dancing, and the scene is the same today.
Kedves szüleim, mikor hozzátok beszélek, szívemben akkor nagy fájdalmat érzek. De néktek köszönöm, hogy a földön élek, és hogy felneveltetek, hálát adok néktek. Tartsátok meg irántam minden szereteteket, áldja meg az Isten minden lépésteket.
And when the formal part of the wedding came to an end, it was my turn to join with the bride and groom and the other tourists. Visitors from all over the world come to Budapest to window shop and to buy. Now, under capitalism, more and more things made in Hungary are being sold in the tourist shops. Back in Mezőkövesd, souvenir shops have opened up along the main street. This store sells folk art made by the local people, and because of the rich Matyó cultural heritage, tourists come here just to take away a memory of the town. Out on the street near the Matyó Museum is a lady who sells newspapers, cigarettes, and souvenirs. I bought this Mezőkövesd style plate which now hangs in our kitchen. It's a daily reminder of that special town, and it makes me think of the folklore and the people we've met there. I think about the original flower designs done by ironös like Kishanko Bori and Kada Istvane. Their Matyó flowers can be seen on pillow covers and blouses and table covers all over the world. I think of those two wonderful women, Erzsébet and her sister Gari Margit. Imagine a lifetime of embroidery work and the number of people who have gotten pleasure from their pieces. I can still see András Kovács in his wood shop making furniture. Szabolcs Kovács still paints Matyó flowers on furniture and eggs, and his decorations awaken in us a real appreciation for Hungarian folk art, bringing the past into the present. Folklore is usually anonymous, but the fact is that there are real people who keep the objects and traditions alive.